Now, every day we're confronted by scenes of inequality, and this was highlighted during the COVID-19 pandemic. Access to transport, to shops, to testing, and very different ways the lockdown is enforced in communities shows the uneven ways that citizens experienced the crisis. Let's talk about inequality for a moment across South African households as we come closer to the much anticipated economic recovery plan by the President. Joining us now is Isobel Frye, and Isobel is the Director of Studies in Poverty and Inequality at the Poverty and Inequality Institute, Thank you so much, Isobel, for your time today. Now, all eyes are on the President, all eyes are on this economic recovery plan. But do you believe that maybe the expectations that South Africans have are too high? Can we certainly look to a plan to eradicate the structural inequality that predates and pre-existed even COVID-19?
Tommy, thank you. I think that's a critical question. Many people have been saying that this plan has had many hours of consultation and deliberation, and yet people have not been impressed by what came out of Cabinet on Friday. One of the challenges that you put forward is that South Africa has had pre-existing levels of poverty and inequality that are amongst outliers globally. Of course, some of this was rooted in the apartheid dispossession. Most of it was where people were denied access to land, as was talked about previously, but also jobs. So if you look, for instance, at the most recent unemployment figures, although unemployment has dropped, formal unemployment, to 4 million people, we're looking at 20 million people who are outside of the labour market of working age. One of the concerns that we have with the plan tabled by Cabinet is that instead of seeking to expand the social grants, which many people have been talking about, there is instead an either-or, a plan to expand public works jobs. Now, we know that public works jobs globally are something that you do for a short time. They're not the silver bullet to getting 20 million people into jobs, because those public works jobs are not going to create long-term jobs. Our view from our analysis is that if, like the Black Sash was saying, you extend the social grants that exist, research shows that there's a multiplier effect that will stimulate economic growth from the bottom up. And so the kinds of demand shocks that we need will not come from only rescuing businesses, but you need to look at the 30 million people who are outside of that economy in order to bring them in as productive. And one of the points that was raised about jobs is whether or not we have the skills. Right now, with 55% of our unemployed not having matric and another 30% only having matric, we need to be very creative in terms of how those jobs, as we look to the future, come online. But right now, people need to eat. The NIDS CRAM data from 2 weeks ago showed that the only way that people are not in greater starvation is because of the COVID grants. And yet what we're seeing now is at the heart of government, a massive debate taking place about whether or not the extension of grants beyond the end of this month is something that can be doable. If it's not, our view is that this crisis will take the country in a stranglehold. So we do hope that the President will not only look to that, but the other thing, Tommy, that we wanted to raise is the question of energy. If you look at Cabinet's proposed plan, there's a huge emphasis on nuclear as well as liquid petroleum gas. What we're not seeing is the expansion of renewable energies, which we've seen globally. Many countries that are taking the lead are using the disruption of COVID to leapfrog into the kinds of renewable energies which will enable ordinary people to be generating their energy and so not depleting from that very limited cash that people have. So our concerns are, firstly, poverty is not being addressed. The one way that we can get money and food into people's households right now is potentially not going to be reduced. And we're not looking forward to the kinds of Paris Agreement meetings through just transitions that will enable us to leapfrog in the energy sector. Instead, we're going back to the question of nuclear, which we know that the courts threw out because of the lack of public consultation. So it doesn't seem to us that there is coherency between this plan and what National Treasury has been putting forward in terms of the potential MTBPS statement in the coming couple of weeks.
The focus, Isobel, obviously on the extension of the basic income, as well as the increase of that and the creation of jobs and employment. But does it matter what type of employment is created for South Africans? Does it matter which sectors are stimulated?
Tommy, a very good question, and it's something which is not very clear from the cabinet discussion release. The point is, yes, absolutely. What we need to do is have jobs created that are able to, in themselves, have a multiplier effect. So we don't need to look at dependency creating public works jobs. What we need to see is the kinds of seed money available for entrepreneurs within townships and other areas, new areas, to start innovating. And for that, we need the demand shock, which comes through the income that can come through social grants. We don't need the kinds of indecent, I call them, or irregular jobs that are basically construction sites. I mean, a lot of the jobs that are promised through this plan that Cabinet tabled are very short-term, very basic mopping up jobs. They're not looking at the kinds of areas within the economy that we need to be developing. So tell me, what we need to anticipate is that for the next 5-10 years, we're going to have a lag between the current skills and the kinds of skills that we need. We should not let that dissuade us from the fact that we need to take that transition to a kind of high return economy. But we do, our concern at SPI and in other not-for-profit research organizations in our sector is, what do we do with the 20 million people that are referred to that are not in our economy? We can't just create job-fixing works for those people for the next 5 to 10 years. We need to enable people to use the kinds of cash available from cash grants to demand, to supply. I mean, basically, the woman who sells vegetables at the end of her road, she can only sell if people have enough money to purchase from her. So the kinds of multiplier effects that can happen at a very localized area, which would then create the demand, which a number of the sort of plan talks to localization, local production. We need that. But right now, because of the poverty and the inequality that you started referring to at the beginning of this conversation, our market is incredibly small, and yet we're carrying about 30 million people whose productivity, whose potential is not being tapped into.
Thank you very much. Sorry to cut you off there, Isobel. Unfortunately, time is not on our side, but thank you for a very comprehensive breaking down there. It certainly is not just a cut and paste situation. Nomayini is not going to work in this type of scenario of creating jobs that do matter, and also pointing out that there will be a lag as far as the skills are concerned, the skills that are needed in the country.